All right, it's 4, so we'll kick off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tumor Talk. This is the collaborative effort between Lenox Hill Neurosurgery and the Journal of Neuro-Oncology, where we usually highlight new publications in the journal, and we talk about, the relevance of the study, the results of the study, and really the rationale behind them. But today we have a special kind of holiday edition where the founder of the Game On Glio podcast, Shannon, do you say Traphagen or Traphagen?
No, Traphagen. It sounded, exactly how it's spelled.
Great. Who I met a while back now and have kind of been working with over the past, few months. And it's a real pleasure to have you on board and talk to us a little bit about kind of what you do with the podcast, but also kind of the other part of that, which I think is super interesting. So Thank you for being here. And, I guess, tell us your story. Tell us how you got into this and what's going on.
Sure. So thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I started the Game On Glio podcast back in 2021. It was about 4 months after my husband, Michael, passed away from glioblastoma. And at the time that he was originally diagnosed in 2019, he was only 44 years old. So it wasn't glioblastoma, brain cancer, brain tumors. That wasn't something that was on our radar at all in any sense of the thought process. It was your typical heart disease, cholesterol, for me, regular mammograms, breast cancer, keeping an eye on everything else that is constantly out in the media and kind of all over the commercials. And so when he was first diagnosed, it really took us both by surprise, and it took me back quite a bit because he was completely healthy otherwise. And it was something that came on really, really quickly. And there were no symptoms, there were no signs. He didn't even have a seizure. That wasn't even what brought us into the ER. It was some severe anxiety brain fog that he was kind of dealing with at that point that brought us in. And just by a fluke, we happened to get an MRI as kind of a secondary, because he was passing all other baseline protocols. Yeah. And he was kind of having a few moments here and there at that point where he was struggling with some recall, but it was very sudden, very quick. And so we just said, we'll do the MRI just to make sure. And that was what caught it. And it wasn't until after that, it was probably 3 or 4 days after that, that he had it was right before the surgery that he had his first seizure. So that was even after it was just one of those things where after he passed away, he was only 45 within 14 months. So not even your standard, 15 months to 3 years. He passed away even quicker than that. And which again, took me by surprise. It took his whole family, all of us by surprise. And I decided that, in the copious amounts of notes that I had been taking, research I had been doing, I really realized that there was just such little discussion in your commonplace setting, out in your typical environment, not within the medical setting, but no commercials, no magazines, no table talk discussion. I mean, there was just really nothing out there. And unless you knew how to navigate clinicaltrials.gov, which is, I'm sorry, but it's a hot mess. And it's not easy to navigate. Unless you really know how to do that and how to be an advocate, you're really scrambling and you're missing a lot of things that are going on. And so I decided I'm gonna start a podcast because that was the bridge that was missing. And at the time, there were a couple of other medical podcasts. There was a couple, like some webinar series that were done within the medical community, but there was nothing really bridging that gap between traditional storytelling and conversation and patient care and caregiver advocacy and doctors in the field and boots on the ground and doing the work and clinical researchers. So I decided, okay, I'm going to bridge this gap. This has happened to us for a reason. This happened to me for a reason. And so I launched Game On Glio, and it took off after the first. I really thought I'm going to do, 1 or 2 seasons, and then I'll figure life out as I go along as a widow. And here we are going into our third season, already planning a fourth after the third season launches. So
did you have a history in this at all, or was this kind of a new idea for you? You just kind of felt the urge to have to get out there and do something?
I'm an author. So I've been in the field of writing for quite some time. At the time I was an associate publisher for a regional health and wellness magazine up here.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I had been kind of immersed in it from that point of view. I had done radio hosting in the past, so I have done that, but I had never done a podcast ever. Yeah. But it was just part of that natural course of storytelling for me, and I am very good at it. And I knew, and I also have a background in social work, which not a lot of people know, but I spent 12 years in trauma, dealing with trauma and severe domestic violence and abuse cases. So I had been doing both sides of this for a long enough period of time that it just felt like this natural connection to give a voice to people who really needed it, and to doctors and clinical researchers out in the field who are desperately trying to raise more awareness of translational research and clinical studies that are going on, so that we can get to a better place with brain cancer like we do with lung cancer and breast cancer and the like. You're
not the first person to obviously tell me a story like this because of what I do, but you're not the first person to tell me the other half of that story, which is that, this diagnosis comes on suddenly. Mm-hmm. And there is obviously a limited amount of time, since we don't have a cure for glioblastoma, that people have to kind of learn as much as they can to navigate a very complex system. And and people have emphasized this, that they can't find support very quickly, and they can't find the information that they need very quickly. Have you seen with the podcast that people responded to this, whether it be patients, families, physicians, even with the outreach you're able to provide, with the ability to communicate?
Yeah, I have. It's been astounding, actually. Just since the first 2 seasons have gone out, we've really seen a surge in people reaching out to us, clinicians reaching out saying, hey, we'd like to be on the show, or can you get this posted for us, because we're doing a study right now, or we have a phase 2 or phase 1 trial that we're recruiting for. Can you please get this up on your site? We have patients constantly. I happened to be in Europe this past spring, and a young lady reached out to me from Ireland because I happened to be over in Ireland. And she said, I want you to know I listen to your podcast and I just saw you're here. And she goes, and I have glioblastoma and I'm 33.
Oh, wow.
And so the amount of reach this has, I've heard from people in Peru who have reached out because there's no resources over there at all. Yeah. I've heard from people in Singapore, Finland, England, over in England, and all across the US. And some of the stories that we get, and the amount of, because what I'll do on the website, I'll put the resources with each guest bio that goes up. And so each one gets updated. And then if there's recruiting going on for clinical resources or clinical trials, I'll make sure that those are constantly updated. And we have people telling us all the time, we got into this trial, or we connected to that resource, or the social worker that you had interviewed for grief and loss, we connected to them. And, and so they're getting help. And so I am seeing that it's making a difference. It is bridging that gap, but it's also connecting. I've kind of inadvertently, without realizing it, have become kind of this conduit between principal investigators, neuro-oncologists, patients, and caregivers, so that when patients or families reach out to either my producer or myself, they tell us what's going on and what they need. And I immediately reach out to or connect them to somebody I think might be able to help them. And then they take it from there. And that's kind of become this natural progression that I didn't foresee happening, but it just seems to be,
No, it's so interesting because it's more than a podcast. A podcast is tells stories or investigates things, and you get to tell the stories, but at the same time, you almost have a clinical duty in a way. You're bridging the gap between patients and caretakers, or physicians and patients, and it's like a whole different genre.
Yeah, it really has kind of taken on this whole new level. of urgency and importance that I didn't see happening. And, what's great about it is that I can understand from a very personal point of view. I've walked the walk and I've been through that journey. And from the standpoint of living it with my late husband, day in and day out, 24 hours a day for 14 months, I know exactly from that side of things what people are going through and what they may be asking, or the things that they may need. And from a clinical perspective, from a physician perspective, just having dealt with and talked to so many doctors and neurologists like yourself and Dr. Bukvar, Dr. Alad Levy, and even Dr. Nader Sinai. I've dealt with so many different physicians and clinicians, and I ask questions that a lot of people won't ask. And I actually had a physician, a neuro-oncologist who I interviewed recently, say to me, he goes, I listened to some of your other podcasts, especially the ones with doctors or scientists, and you tend to make everybody emotional at some point throughout the journey. You become like a Barbara Walters for the neuro-oncology world. And I can't help but laugh, because that's what I want to draw out. I want patients and caregivers to see the human side of being in your position, and that you're in this fight alongside everybody else.
I think it's a very powerful medium, and I think what you're doing is very unique. Being able to do that, you put a story behind something that is, the second, line on the 10 o'clock news, and only when someone famous has one, right? And you're giving a story to it. And so it actually brings up my next question, which is, why do you think this disease isn't better represented in media, and why isn't it known about things like cardiac disease or just cancer in general? Why is it such a hidden thing?
Honestly, I think part of the reason that it doesn't get as much coverage is because it's also one of the worst diseases there is. There is no cure, and it's disproportionately funded compared to so many other cancers that are out there. And that is something that it's a trend that's been ongoing for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's part of why it doesn't get as much coverage, because there's no answers.
Yeah.
So when media responds to a report that's out there, yes, maybe they mention quickly about somebody famous or a celebrity who had a tumor or has brain cancer, who just passed away from it, and they leave it at that. There's nowhere else for them to go with it, because they don't know what else to say. When the Today Show, or, even in the scientific community, when they talk about it, or in the insurance community or pharmaceutical community, there's no answers, because there's no rhyme or reason right now for why this happens, especially to extremely young individuals. And that seems to be the largest portion of the people that are getting brain cancers. And there's no way to cure it right now. And so I think it just kind of gets shoved under the rug. It's brought up quickly, and then it's let go, because it doesn't have an answer, like breast cancer or lung cancer, or even, pancreatic, all these other, there's a roadmap for a lot of these other cancers, and there just isn't one yet for brain cancer, but we need to change that.
No, I agree. I think that we've made a lot of progress with a lot of other medical conditions, and this one remains, as you said, devastating and universally so. And so I think that is a big component of it. There's not enough success to highlight to make the story compelling enough, maybe. And it still is a rare disease. But you kind of led me right where I wanted to go next, which is to tell me about the fundraising component of what you do, and when did that start? How did you decide, I need to do even more, because it's not like you weren't doing enough, right?
Yeah. I don't know how to say no. I tend to take on a lot. So, we started fundraising, I think the fall. So the first anniversary of Mike's death in October, we decided that a few months before that, I decided, all right, you know what, I'm going to start fundraising, because there are a lot of clinical trials that are going on right now, whether it's translational or whether they're in the clinical research, the clinical phase of it, where they're testing with human patients. There is a lot going on right now, but there's not a lot of backing. And I really wanted to see that change. And we've had some amazing foundations kind of start to come up that are really starting to want to pump dollars directly into clinical research, where it's not being phased out into staffing or marketing, or, money's kind of being dispersed, and then maybe there's a little chunk that goes over to the actual trial. So I decided, Mike and I were big cyclists. I still am. We have been riding for years. And so I figured one of the best ways I could honor him would be to start a fundraiser. And so I started Traphagen's Trail Ride for Brain Cancer. And we happened to have a clinical research trial that was going on right here in the city that I live in, Buffalo. And it's for Cervax-M. And it's a vaccine that is administered directly into a patient before they start their chemo and radiation regimen. And then they're given a booster every so often. And it's proving very effective at keeping the glioblastoma at bay, keeping it kind of from wanting to spread and continue to find new pathways. But they needed some help. And so we ran our first fundraiser for them and decided to do a second year. And we haven't raised hundreds of thousands of dollars yet, but we have raised over $30,000 for them. And we're continuing to shed light on different clinical trials like that. So my next step, I have a meeting with an attorney coming up, and we're looking at what we want to do with the fundraisers so that I can expand this nationally. Yeah. And we can do this fundraiser and these cycling events across the nation. And the money, 100% of the money goes directly into the clinical trial. It doesn't go anywhere else. It doesn't get spread out among other cancers or to staffing or the foundation or the market. It just goes directly to the trial.
Well, I'll tell you, it's hugely important. And you say you didn't raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, but $30,000 goes a very long way in the research world. And every little bit is helpful. And it's especially critical because research kind of throughputs to get funding are limited. And so for people who are they have sound science behind what they want to do, sometimes establishing that preliminary data, which costs money, they can't get that seed funding for it through their institutions or through, NIH or whatnot. And so these foundation grants are a huge benefit to really everyone. And it's a tough disease. And so, every bit counts immensely. And so I think that's fantastic. Going national would be great. I'm sure you're excited for that because it's more work, right?
Yeah, it is, but I have to be honest. I mean, I really think that given what we're seeing and given where the trajectory is that so many are going, like you guys at Lenox Hill, there are so many things that are coming up. I just had an interview that I did for the podcast. We're putting up the video tomorrow with Dr. Khalid Shah, who has got some amazing translational research that's coming out where he manipulated the actual cancer cells themselves within glioblastoma and then reintroduced them into mice to hopefully vaccinate as well as kill the cells that were there. And it's stuff like that I want to keep highlighting. So if it means that I have to do more or spread myself a little thinner to go and nationally help support some of this other work, I'm willing to do that because I really think that we need funding to go directly into these trials so that we can get them into human phase and so that we can get them FDA approved and so that we can move the needle a little bit quicker because as you said earlier, patients just don't have, it's a clicking, it's a time clock for them. It's a ticking bomb and it just doesn't stop just because there's a trial that might be coming up that, they might miss the boat on that. And that kills me to know that. And that was exactly what happened with Mike. We missed the window by a week. And that could have been something that would have kept him here today. Even if he still had it, he could still be living with it. And I think that's the biggest thing would be, even if we can't find a cure right now, if we can get it to the point where it's treated like a rheumatoid arthritis, where it may flare up, but we can get it under control and somebody can go on and live their life and have a great quality of life. But there's a roadmap. There's a way to kind of tackle it to give patients longer than just a couple of years, because right now that's absurd. It's absurd.
It's absurd. And it's depressing as a clinician as well, when, you're dealing with this on a daily basis and you you kind of run out of options. I tell patients constantly, don't give up hope ever, because, look what we did with the COVID vaccine, right? It took us a year. But we had the whole world working on it, right? Now we've got a fraction of that world working on this, which only affects a tiny fraction of the population instead of putting everyone at risk. But you can't give up hope on that regard. The technology is there. The process is daunting without a doubt. But I think, part of the hope that you have to have is that there's people like you out there promoting it and helping raise funds and communicating to people what should be done, right? You're a resource now and you've got the eternity of the internet to hold you there, which is nice.
Yeah.
So what, we understand what's coming up next for the fundraiser. What comes up next for Game On Glio Podcast? You're going to still do it? You're going to keep it going? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're actually recording for season 3 right now. So season 3 will launch in May during Brain Cancer Awareness Month, which we always do.
Yeah.
And then we tend to run 1 to 2 episodes a month, and that'll run through the rest of the year.
Great.
But within season 3, we're actually doing a few docu-series. So we're doing some short little documentaries with certain individuals as well that I think adds another layer and elevates the storytelling quite a bit. And then we've got, we're doing some other stuff. We're already building out for season 4. I mean, season 3 is pretty much booked, and season 4 is half booked already. So
amazing.
It's definitely become, it's a great medium. It really is.
Yeah.
It's a great medium to not only carry Mike's legacy forward. I mean, I think a lot of times when I'm talking to individuals, sometimes they forget that I'm a widow. I was a 43-year-old widow.
Yeah.
That, life was just, and some of the people that I've had on patient wise are younger than that, in their 30s and their 20s. And that is something that I want to stress to people, that there's no barrier. There's no cultural barrier. There's no racial barrier. This affects a lot of people. And I had a neurologist say to me recently, we were actually filming at their hospital, and they said that they treat probably 500 to 600 cases a year. And that's including benign and malignant. But when you look at the totality of people in the US who get brain tumors, primary brain tumors, even if they're benign, you're looking at 100 to 200,000 cases per year. That's not a small number. And I want to stress that so much, because I don't think people are aware of how often this really does happen more than not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One last question to get, I try to keep this about 30 minutes, so we'll end soon, but get a little bit personal. I mean, just, I imagine so, but I want to hear kind of in your own words, talking to people, running with this, keeping yourself dedicated to this programming, hearing other stories, talking to physicians, what do you, how does it help you kind of cope with your husband's loss and, kind of think about the future? Is it the type of thing where you think, what, I'll be done with this at some point one day? Or is it the type of thing that just the more you hear it, the more you're kind of dedicated to it because you realize that story is there,
It's a good question. It's one I've been asked frequently. My own mother actually has a tendency to worry that maybe I'm a little in it too much and maybe it's holding back the healing. But in all honesty, I think it has helped me more than not. And not only does it allow me to continue to kind of carry Mike's legacy forward, but it's helped me find purpose in a very chaotic year and a half, where it wasn't just his loss. It was losing, we had children that we lost. We had an adoption that we lost because of his diet. So there were multiple losses in a very short period of time. And the way that I function is really just in finding a way to help others, because it's the only way I can find purpose in navigating that kind of trauma. And what I've really learned from it is that it's provided me a lot of strength, but it's also provided a lot of hope. And if I can see the hope in something this dark at times, even with neuro-oncologists and surgeons, and when I talk to them, they hear the hope that I have in what they're doing, and it elevates them and it helps them realize that there really is a light. We just have to get there. And so it may feel at times like I'm constantly pushing this rock up a mountain and it's kind of rolling back and I have to keep going and keep going. But right now, this just feels like where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing, and where it goes from here, I don't know.
Yeah.
If I've learned anything in the last few years, it is that I can't really think further out than the day that's in front of me. And whatever challenge is presented, whatever work I'm doing, every time I hear a story from somebody, even when on days when I question, okay, should I do another season? Should I keep going with this? I'll randomly all of a sudden get a story from somebody or an email through my producer, or we'll be filming somewhere and we'll randomly bump into somebody whose best friend or cousin was just diagnosed with glioblastoma or another brain cancer. And it's just another reminder that the work I'm doing is really important right now. And I have the voice to do it. And I have the natural storytelling capability to do it. So for right now, we're just going to see where it takes me, but I don't know where the journey lands. I don't know what's ahead of me or what's in store, but I'm just going to keep going because it feels right.
Yeah. I mean, look, I have these conversations with patients every day. I don't get to broadcast them to the world, but I do think that hearing the stories from both sides, not just the patient, but the patient's family, and then the physicians and their drive for wanting to do this, they all make me a better doctor and probably a better human being, right? Just understanding it gives you a lot of perspective. And I give you a lot of credit because it's not easy, certainly after losing someone so close to you, to get up and start all this and keep running with it like this. And so I want to thank you for being on. Great having you. I really love when we get the opportunity to have kind of special guests on the show. And you're probably the leader in glioblastoma research right now because of all the people you've spoken to. So you're probably at the forefront, much more so than the rest of us. And so keep doing what you're doing, and I hope it continues to grow, and I hope you continue to do well. And I look forward to chatting with you and working with you more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the collaboration with you guys, and I appreciate your time having me on. I'm really proud of the work that you guys do, and so anytime I can talk to you and help highlight the significance of you guys being out on the front lines of this, it matters to me. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back in a few weeks with the next episode. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.